How are you doing? A good vach, a good week, a Hag Hanukkah Sameach. That's Moshe Storch, the accidental Talmudist musical director, singing Al Hanisim country style. Let's light up the darkness. Yeah, who's going to be with us as we get another great week of learning? Started with a bang. We're in a new chapter. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. Who's going to be joining us? Matt Milner from Eau Claire is first. Yehudit Sobel from South Carolina. Melissa from Great Neck. Pauline in Arkansas. Chaim in Charlotte. Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey. Tom in PA. Mary Lou in Florida. There's two of you there. Lynn and Mary Lou there in Florida. Paula in Chicago. Larry Polonetsky in Queens. Suzanne in New Mexico. Renee is sleepy. Must be East Coast. Hag Hanukkah Sameach, she says. Bobby with us from Arkansas. John in Sedona. Donna in Bahama, North Carolina. Ann in Merced, Wayne in Hendersonville, North Carolina, Gail in Virginia. Whoa. Where am I? Gail in Virginia. Donna knew it was Moshe. Charles in San Antonio. Randy in Florida. Suzanne says shalom. Lindsay with us from Cincinnati. Robin says Chag Urim Sameach. And that's where I am right now. And over there on the YouTube side, Marilyn Groff with us in Fort Worth. Welcome, everybody. It's so good to be together. Tonight's episode of AT Daily. I think we're like 340 some episodes into our daily show. We started on January 5th, so we're not that far away from the 1-year anniversary of AT Daily. Tonight's episode dedicated by Ralph Locker. Thank you, Ralph, a good friend. Dedicating tonight's episode for a healing, a mishaberach, for his friend Pinchas ben Baruch. Got to get Pinchas's mom's name from you. But may Pinchas have a complete recovery of body, mind, spirit, all the healing in the world for Ralph's friend Pinchas. If you want to dedicate an episode or just partner with us in sharing Torah with the world, we're in the midst of our annual campaign, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Partnering with us is a huge merit because you enable us to share Torah with the world. We are holding. Okay, we're starting a new chapter. So where are we? This is Tractate Pesachim, the 4th volume of the Talmud. We're opening chapter 2 and Mishna 1. This is page Chaf Aleph, page 21. Okay. So now with chapter 2, we spent a lot of time kind of in the weeds when we had that question about burning pure and impure terum of chametz, consecrated for the priest, whether it could be burned together. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what is purity, tahara, and ritual impurity, tuma, in Judaism. Now we get back to the subject of preparing for Passover. Right before Passover begins, we have to remove all chametz from our possession. We talked about burning it and what time we need to burn it in chapter 1, and we're going to continue that discussion with some very interesting nuances tonight. So let's read the Mishnah. Today I read from the Art Scroll, which is how I made my original journey through Daf Yomi, the 7.5-year journey through the Talmud. It felt like coming back to an old friend. I really love both editions. The Art Scroll and the Koren, they have different strengths, and it's great to go back and forth between them. All right, our Mishnah, the first Mishnah of chapter 2 here in Tractate Pesachim. Here we go. Now we encountered this Mishnah before. We've met this Mishnah, as it were. Now we're going to go into greater detail. As long as it is permitted to eat chametz, leaven bread, on the morning before Passover begins that night, as long as it's still permitted to eat it, one may feed it to domesticated animals, to beasts, and to birds. And one may sell it to a nochri. We're going to talk about that. This word gets translated sometimes into English kind of differently at different times. But basically, it means a Gentile. Here, the Art Scroll is saying to a Gentile. One may sell to a Gentile. And its benefit is permitted. When its time has passed, its benefit is forbidden. And one may not fire an oven or stove with it. The Mishnah cites a dispute regarding the proper method of disposing of chametz. Rabbi Yehuda says the disposal of chametz is fulfilled only through burning it. Meaning that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. That's a minority opinion. The rest do not agree that you can only dispose of it by burning. But the sages say he may also crumble the chametz and scatter it to the wind or cast it into the sea. Meaning, when you sell it, you've already removed it from your possession. So whatever's left after you've sold whatever you're going to sell, now the rest that's in your possession has to be disposed of permanently. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to burn it, but the sages say you may also scatter it to the wind, or you may crumble and scatter to the wind, or cast it into the sea. Either way, irretrievable. Okay. Let me get my notes in front of me. All right. Now, we already saw when we first encountered this Mishnah that the language of the Mishnah is very precise. It could have said, as long as we eat chametz, we can benefit from chametz, right? It could have been worded that way, or rather, as long as we eat chametz, we may also feed it to our animals. That's a form of benefit, right? If you, especially in an agricultural society, if you own animals, if you're feeding your animals with this chametz, this leaven that came from your kitchen, you're getting benefit from it because your animals are being fed by your chametz. So it could have said, as long as we eat it, we can feed it to our animals. But that's not the way it's worded. It's worded, as long as it is permitted to eat chametz, one may feed it to domesticated animals, beasts, and birds. And to summarize, since we've already encountered this idea, why is that an important difference? And the Gemara opens its discussion of this Mishnah by clarifying this. Because it is not... this Mishnah does not accord with the opinion of Rabbi Meir in the previous chapter, right? That opening Mishnah that we had, where Rabbi Meir said that we can eat chametz up through the 5th hour of the day. That would be basically, if the hours were 1 hour long, we discussed this before, that when we're talking about the 4th, 5th, 6th hour of the day, we're talking about that the daylight is divided into 12 equal parts. So if it's like the first day of spring or the first day of fall, when the days and the nights are equal, so then each, hour would actually be 60 minutes long. Passover is a spring holiday, so it's pretty close to that. So you can, according to Rabbi Meir, we can eat our chametz through the 5th hour. That would be like between 10 and 11 in the morning. And then we burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour, which is like between 11 and noon. But Rabbi Yehuda said, no, we can eat our chametz up until the end of the 4th hour, through the 4th hour, so like between 9 and 10 a.m. Then between 10 and 11, we hold the chametz in abeyance. We don't burn it, but we can't eat it anymore. And then he agrees with Rabbi Meir and everybody else that at the beginning of the 6th hour, like at 11:01 a.m., we burn the chametz. It becomes biblically prohibited at noon because that's the afternoon. In the afternoon of the day before Passover begins that night, that afternoon, when the temple is standing, we go to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage. We bring our paschal offering, the Pesach, a lamb or a goat. It is slaughtered on the afternoon, and the Torah says that you shall, that basically you can't offer your offering. You can't slaughter the Pesach over chametz, over bread, right? So the bread is prohibited in the afternoon. It's gone, needs to be gone, needs to be destroyed. And the rabbis built in rabbinically an extra hour as a buffer. That's why we burn our chametz like at 11:01 a.m. and not at 12:01 in the afternoon. So again, Rabbi Meir says we can eat it basically up until the time we burn it. And Rabbi Yehuda says We can eat it up until 10 a.m. Then for 1 hour, it's an extra buffer to be safe. And then at 11, we start burning it. Now, according to the Mishna that we're reading here, it says that we, as long as it is permitted, we may feed it to our animals. And basically what this ends up meaning is it permitted? Is the chametz permitted between 10 and 11? Yes, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, but really it comes from that ruling of Rabban Gamliel. It's not permitted to us, it's not permitted to the normal person, but it is permitted for a priest, a kohen, to eat the teruma, the consecrated chametz that is set aside only for the priest. It's part of the tithing process. They can still eat their teruma in that 5th hour of the day. And as long as someone is permitted to eat chametz, we can still feed the chametz to our animals, even though we are not permitted to eat it, right? And that's because of that careful wording of this Mishnah. As long as it is permitted to everybody, no, it doesn't have to be permitted to everybody, but as long as it's permitted to somebody, we can still feed it to our animals. Who is it permitted to? According to the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, to the priests to eat their teruma. And that actually is the halacha, as we saw when we came into this Mishnah, when we first encountered this Mishnah during our discussion of chapter 1. Okay. So then the Gemara moves on and says, okay, well, why does our Mishnah say domesticated animals and beasts? Okay, and I think it says birds as well, right? And birds. So why does it have to list all 3 categories of animals? Why couldn't it just say it is permitted to feed the animals? And so now the Gemara makes a distinction. It says, well, domesticated animals and beasts have different behavior with respect to this kind of food, to our chametz, right? To leaven that we might give to them. Why? Because a domesticated animal, so think, what's a domesticated animal? Could be your horse, could be your donkey, other domesticated animals. And if you feed them your chametz, they'll probably eat your cow. It'll probably eat some of it, and it'll probably just let some fall. It's not going to be so careful to get every crumb. So once some of it falls, it's right there. You know that you have to dispose of your chametz. It's still visible, so then you can get rid of it. But with a beast, right? And so the beasts that are mentioned, and we've talked about some of them, these are not domesticated. These are, the beasts that would come in and out of our property. Could be a mouse, could be a marten, right? Kind of a sneaky little animal, sort of like a ferret that might come in. And if you give them, they come and visit you. It's like your friendly, non-domesticated marten that comes into your property. So if he comes in, he might say, he might take the leaven, he might eat some of it, and then he's not going to leave anything behind, especially as, we saw in that last chapter that the martens get the feeling like, oh, all these people are getting rid of this extra food. There's not going to be the food source around that I had before. So they're going to, they feel that, they sense that, and whatever they don't need at that moment, they'll take with them and hide it, right? So that it'll still be theirs. And so it's a problem because he might hide it on your property, and we need to get rid of all of our chametz. So we might have thought that we can feed it to the domesticated animal whose leavings are obvious and easy to dispose of, but we can't feed it to the beasts. The Mishnah is telling us, yes, you can feed it to the beasts, right? And so we're going to be careful not to violate either of these prohibitions. With regard to chametz in the home of a Jew on Passover, the Torah says both, it shall not be found on your property and it shall not be seen in your possession. It should not be found by you and it shall not be seen, around you in your possessions. But while it's still permitted for us to eat it, it's not, or even for someone to eat it, as we just discussed, as long as the priest can still eat it in the 5th hour, it's going to be okay, permitted to give it to a domesticated animal or to a beast. And then the Gemara asks, well, why? What about birds? What's the deal with birds? And the answer is simply, well, once we've mentioned that you could feed it to domesticated animals and you could feed it to beasts, lest you think that birds are not included, the Tana of the Mishnah includes that you can feed it to birds as well. Next question that the Gemara brings up, and now we get into this lovely series where the answer is going to be pshita, which means obvious, right? It seems like an obvious question, and then the Gemara answers, oh, not so obvious. It's not so obvious. So the way that they chime in with this word, pshita, right? And if you may have heard, this is the same word as pshat, right? And so you may be familiar that we have this sort of system of inquiry into scripture called Pardes, which is really an acronym. Pardes is like Eden, the Garden of Eden, or it's the word that became paradise. But it's also an acronym for when we're deriving meaning from verses of scripture. We want to get into every verse at 4 levels, right? The P of Pardes, or the Pei in Hebrew, is Peshat, right? The obvious, the normal, the regular, the revealed meaning, the clear, literal meaning of the verse. That's the Peshat, right? So here, Pshita, like obvious, that's the clear meaning. Then there will be the Remez, which is the scent, right? So we're going a little deeper. Then the Derosh, right, where we're going to go in deeper still and relate this verse to other verses and see, what lessons can be learned out of it. And then at the deepest level is the Sod, the secret, right? And so usually that refers to the mystical kind of Kabbalistic meanings when we go really deep in the meaning of a verse. But the clear and literal and revealed meaning is the Peshat, and that's the same root of this word, Pshita. All right, so the first thing it says, so we may feed it to the birds, etc. Then the next clause in our Mishnah was, and one may sell it to a Gentile. So the Gemara says, Pshita, obvious. We already know that we're allowed to benefit from it as long as it's permitted to eat. We can feed it to our animals. Why wouldn't we be allowed to sell it, to a non-Jew, sell it to a Gentile? We know we may benefit, but this actually goes to tell you that you might have thought differently, because there's a Baraisa which teaches that Beis Shammai, the followers of Shammai, right, so one of the really early Tanaim in the late Second Temple period, and that the house of Shammai, the followers of Shammai, actually said that you may only sell your chametz to a Gentile if you know that he is going to, or she is going to consume it before Passover begins. That was actually a very stringent ruling on the part of Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel, the followers of Hillel, absolutely disagreed with it. Beis Hillel said, as long as it is permitted to eat, right, as long as someone is permitted to eat chametz, like the priest, the kohanim, it is also permitted to sell, to derive benefit from it by selling the chametz, period. And actually the halacha, the law, was established according to Beis Hillel. We can sell to a Gentile as long as it is permitted for someone to eat. So up through the 5th hour, you could still sell the chametz to a Gentile. But there was also a ruling in that same Baraisa of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, who said, and with regard to kutach, which is a dip, okay, it's a very particular kind of dip that was popular in Talmudic times, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, with kutach, you have to sell that no less than 30 days before Passover. Why? Because this is not like some food that, if I gave you a jar of this very pungent dip, you wouldn't eat it all at once. If you have a jar of it, it might easily last you 30 days or more. But it's 30 days that we've seen that period before. At 30 days out from a holiday is when we start, sort of when we start getting into that holiday by studying the laws of that holiday. Prior to that, there would be no responsibility. According to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, before 30 days, you can sell kutach to a Gentile. After that, you can't. Now, obviously, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira follows Beis Shammai, meaning that you can only sell it to a Gentile if you know that he's going to or she is going to consume it before Pesach. But that is not the law. The halacha, the law came out according to Beis Hillel, that it doesn't matter once it's out of the possession of the Jew, the Gentile can do whatever they want with it. It's not our concern, and that applies to kutach as well. In passing, we'll mention what is kutach. It is a dip made from sour milk and moldy bread and salt. And when you first hear that, you're like, oh, that sounds not appealing, right? Sour milk and moldy bread. But this actually was a delicacy. And then we remember, very expensive French cheeses could easily be described as moldy cheese. Right? I mean, blue cheese is moldy cheese. So the fact that it's sour milk and moldy bread doesn't mean that it's gross. In fact, it was a delicacy. All right. The next clause. So it said, as long as it's permitted to eat the chametz, meaning the priest can eat it, right? It was permitted to feed the animals, permitted to sell it to a Gentile. And then the next clause was, and it is permitted for benefit. Pshita! Obvious. You just told us that it's permitted to give it to the animals and permitted to sell it. Obviously, it's permitted for benefit. Why is this clause in the Mishnah? And the answer is because this actually refers to a ruling that Rava would give this ruling later, but this is a Mishnah. So what was it really talking about? That once you've burned the chametz, right? Once you've scorched it and it's no longer edible as chametz, then it's no longer chametz. So if for some reason there was some utility for you of burned, scorched chametz, just like basically the ashes of burning this leaven, that you could use. If there's some benefit to you of that, you could use it. It would be okay because it's no longer chametz. Once it's been scorched so much that it's unrecognizable as chametz, then it's not chametz. And if there was some benefit to you, you would be permitted to have that benefit. Next clause of the Mishnah. Once its time has passed, right, the time when it was permitted, and now you're supposed to be burning it, once its time has passed, it is forbidden for benefit. Pshita! Obvious, says the Gemara. We just learned that while it's permitted, we can benefit in these ways. So obviously, when it's no longer permitted, we cannot benefit from it. Why does the Mishnah need to include this clause? Interesting statement here, because during the 6th hour, when it stands to be burned, okay, so maybe, there's a lot that needs to be thrown into the fire where it's going to be burned, and it hasn't been burned yet. But once that 6th hour arrives, it's prohibited. And therefore, now in that 6th hour, right, in the 7th hour, it's going to be prohibited biblically, prohibited by Torah law. In the 6th hour, it's prohibited by rabbinic decree. If a man tried to betroth a woman using some chametz during the 6th hour, that betrothal, the kiddushin, would not be valid. Now, when you hear that, you're like, who would try to betroth his intended bride with chametz during the 6th hour on the morning of Passover? Nobody would try to do that. Why would you try to do that? But they use these kinds of formulas of law to teach a lesson. What they're saying is, elsewhere, when we get to Tractate Kiddushin and the laws of betrothal and the laws of marriage, we'll see that, man and woman can become betrothed, as it were. It's different than getting engaged. Engaged is just like an agreement that we're going to get married. When you're betrothed, you actually are married. You just haven't completed that wedding ceremony, but you already become prohibited to other people. The point, though, is that the process of betrothal requires an exchange of something that has some value. Small, minimal value, only a peruta, like basically a penny. But what they're telling us here is that chametz, once the 6th hour arrives on the morning of before Passover begins, has no value whatsoever, has no financial value. Even if it was a stack of loaves of bread, that would have a lot of value under normal times, once that 6th hour has arrived, it is absolutely prohibited for a Jew not only to eat it, but to benefit from it in any way. It has zero value. Now, that's by rabbinic decree. Kiddushin, giving somebody something of value in order to become betrothed, that's a biblical law. But even that biblical law would be canceled in this situation, because by rabbinic decree, that chametz, once the 6th hour has arrived, has no value. Because it's prohibited to a Jew, it has no value to a Jew or to the Jewish people. So a betrothal could not be accomplished with any chametz in the 6th hour. Okay, and it says, and the Mishna said the next clause, and one may not fire an oven with it. Did it say that? And one may not fire an oven or a stove with it. Pshita! Obvious. We just said several times, when it's permitted, we can benefit from it. When it's no longer permitted, we cannot benefit from it. You would think, so why would you think that you could fire your oven with it? Obviously, you're getting some benefit if you're using it to heat up your oven so that you could cook food in it. And the Gemara says, well, you might have thought that since Rabbi Yehuda said that the only appropriate way to dispose of your chametz is by burning, that, well, once you're having that fire, you could cook something on that fire. And the answer is no, you cannot benefit from it. Once that 6th hour has arrived, you need to burn it. The sages said you could crumble it and scatter it in the wind or throw it in the ocean. But if you were burning it, you could not benefit from that fire. Now we finally get past the peshitas, the obvious nuances brought by the Gemara. And now we have a teaching, and we're getting near the end. So if you have questions or comments, get them in there, and I'll come to those. Chizkiah says, from where do we derive this prohibition to benefit? All right, so now this whole Mishnah, the whole point of this Mishnah, and we've gone through a few obvious rulings, but the whole point of it is that once it is prohibited to eat it, it is also prohibited to benefit from it. That's the whole point, right? Once it's prohibited, once it's not permitted to anybody to eat it, it's prohibited, and it's also prohibited to benefit from it. From where is this derived in the Bible? How do we know that that is true? Now, the law says in the Torah, chametz shall not be eaten. So the first answer, according to Chizkiah, is, well, you look at that, and here, the syntax, the grammar is very important. The Torah doesn't say one shall not eat chametz, right? Once Passover arrives, you shall not eat chametz, and they already derived that this starts on the 14th of Nisan. Passover begins on the 15th. We've already derived that it's going to become prohibited that afternoon. But the question is, once it's prohibited to eat, why is it prohibited for benefit? The Torah doesn't say, basically come the afternoon of the 14th, one shall not eat chametz. It says that once that time comes, chametz shall not be eaten. It's that kind of passive voice, whatever that's called. Passive, it's not participle. I'm not good at knowing the names of grammatical tenses in English. But the point is, it doesn't say one shall not eat. It says chametz shall not be eaten. So according to Chizkiah, what that's telling us is not only shall you not eat the chametz, but you will not use it in such a way that it will lead to you eating, right? So in other words, if you benefit from it, meaning if you somehow get financial gain from the chametz after it's no longer permitted for you to eat, any financial gain that a person gets, in part, is going to go to the food that they eat. Right? Any money that's in our bank account, it doesn't matter whether we, literally spend it in the supermarket or literally order food with it. The fact is, if we have money in our bank account, some of it is going to end up getting spent on food. Everybody, eats. So if we benefit from it in some way, then it's going to, in some part, fund our eating. And according to Chizkiah, so now that's how we know, because it says shall not be eaten, implies no benefit that could in any way lead to eating. And that's how we know that once we're prohibited to eat, we're also prohibited to benefit. The Gemara says, well, that's a little bit roundabout, and it disagrees with that ruling of Rabbi Abahu, because Rabbi Abahu says, actually, we don't need, it's not only when the Torah says that something shall not be eaten, that in that case, it's prohibited to benefit, but when the Torah says one shall not eat a thing, then we can eat it. We're prohibited to eat it, but we could benefit from it. According to Rabbi Abahu, even when the Torah says you shall not eat something, that also means you shall not benefit from it. And where does he get that? So Rabbi Abahu is going to learn that. Hold on. Let me get this in front of me. So Rabbi Abahu is going to get that from the Torah's prohibition on eating a nevela. What's a nevela? A nevela is a kosher animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher manner. An animal that died in some other way. So it's the carcass of a kosher animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher manner. There's nothing wrong with the animal. It's healthy. It's good for eating. But a Jew can only eat an animal that was slaughtered properly, right? For it to be kosher meat, it has to be slaughtered in the proper manner. If it wasn't slaughtered in that manner, a Jew is not permitted to eat it. You shall not eat. But in the case of the nevela, the Torah also says what you may do with it, which we'll talk about in a moment. So according to Rabbi Abahu, from that we learn that one shall not eat something includes one shall not benefit from it, unless, like the case of the nevela, the Torah specifies otherwise, right? So the general default meaning, according to Rabbi Abahu, of one shall not eat equals you shall not eat this and you shall not benefit from it. When there's an exception to that, like in the case of a nevela, the Torah will tell you if it is permitted to benefit, but if it's silent on whether you can benefit or not, you cannot benefit. Right, and so Rabbi Abahu agrees with Rabbi Meir, who's learning this idea from the nevela in a baraisa. For it was taught in a baraisa. Scripture states, "You shall not eat any carcass," right, any nevela, to the stranger who is within your gates. The ger where is it? The ger asher b'sharecha, right? So the stranger within your gates. This is going to come to mean, as it's defined here, basically the non-Jew who has come to live among you. What is that? That is a Noahide, right? So the ger asher misharecha is the ger he's not a Jew, but he's going to come live among you according to your way of life, right? So like Judaism is not a proselytizing religion at all. You don't have to become a Jew in order to be a person with a place in heaven and an absolutely righteous person fulfilling your obligations. What you have to do is be a Noahide, meaning you submit to the Noahide laws, the 7 Noahide laws, recognize that there is one God, don't blaspheme, don't murder, don't lie, establish courts of law, don't eat a limb off a living animal, don't steal. It's not coming off the tip of my tongue right now, but the 7 Noahide laws. Anyone can submit to the 7 Noahide laws. They're going to have a place in heaven. And what they're not is following some other religion, right? So they're sort of, they're submitting to the Bible, the Jewish Bible, without becoming a Jew. And there's no need for them to become a Jew. Their place in the world to come is assured. So according to this baraisa, so you shall not eat the carcass. The Torah says, to the stranger who is within your gates, you shall give it that he may eat it or sell it to a nochri. Right? So a nochri is not the ger within your gates, not the stranger within your gates. Rather, the nochri is someone who is part of another religion. Right? So sometimes this gets translated as a Gentile. Sometimes this gets translated as a heathen. Sort of in Talmudic times, if you're outside the Jewish domain and practicing another religion, they would think of that as being a heathen. it's not so much judgmental as just saying they're not submitting to the authority of the one God as defined by the Torah and Jewish scripture. So this line in the Torah, and that's at Deuteronomy 14:21, says, "So the Jew shall not eat the carcass, but to the stranger within your gates you shall give it, that he may eat it, or sell it to a heathen." From the simple reading of the verse, I have established only that one may convey a nevela, that carcass, to a stranger by giving it as a gift, and to a heathen by selling it to him. But basically, what's going to happen here is Rabbi Meir is going to establish that the way that verse, if you really break down the syntax of it, is that you could give it or sell it to the stranger within your community, the Noahide, and you could give it or sell it to the Gentile, to the non-Jew who's part of another religion, to the Nochri. And then Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree and say, no. The verse is very specific. You can give it to the Noahide and you can sell it to the Nochri. So Rabbi Yehuda says the Torah is being specific. It says what it means, and it kind of makes sense because we have an obligation that if we have a non-Jew, but who's coming to live among us and to be a Noahide, and he falls on tough times, then he's like a member of the community, and we're going to, give him tzedakah, we're going to give him charity and make sure that he doesn't starve. But to the heathen, you don't have that obligation. It's a different set of obligations. So, so that's why it would make sense that if you're not going to eat, you can't eat the nevela yourself, right? So if one of your animals that, you were planning on slaughtering it and eating it, but then it died, right, from some other way, it was mangled by a beast, or, it had an accident and died, so it wasn't slaughtered in a kosher manner. Now the Jew can't eat it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can either give it to a Noahide or sell it to a Nochri. And Rabbi Meir says you could give or sell to either one of those groups. And that's where we are when we leave off now. But the way we got there is, what does it mean? So we're going to continue tomorrow, with God's help, discussing that this is the source of what? This is the source of where we get the law that we cannot derive benefit, right? We cannot derive benefit. So if you give, are you deriving benefit? Arguable. I mean, there's this sort of the value of gift giving. If you sell, for sure you're deriving benefit. So there's going to be more to discuss when we continue this tomorrow. All right, let's see if there are questions or comments on this. Okay. Donna Smith, is the remainder of crumbs on your skin addressed? Well, that's interesting. You're saying, like, for example, when you're throwing the chametz into the fire, there might be some that just is on your hands. Remember that we saw this also at the time that we dispose of the chametz. There was a recital that we make, both at the time that we search for it on the night of the 14th, and then on the morning of the 14th of Nisan when we burn it. We also recite that anything, that we weren't able to discover and burn, or dispose of and then burn what was left, if something escaped our notice, then we hereby declare it ownerless. We just in case we miss something, there's a sort of catch-all that we don't own it. So, we're certainly that night we're going to wash our hands. We're actually going to wash our hands twice by the Seder. And we're going to try to make sure that there's nothing left in any way. And in case there is something that we miss, we've already nullified it and said that it is not ours. It is not our intention to hold on to anything. Sharon, if you want, can you choose to burn the chametz earlier, kind of like lighting Shabbos candles and taking on Shabbos earlier than the prescribed time? I feel like I should just know the answer to that and just say, well, yeah, why not? But, we've also encountered a few principles where the sages are very loath to destroy anything of value when we don't need to destroy. right? So they don't want you going into wanton destruction. They would definitely not like, that you have like all these boxes of cereal in your house, and now you're going to take it out and destroy like, hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of this property. So that's why the majority of our chametz we sell to a non-Jew, right? So now it's out of the possession, it's not out of the domain of the Jewish people. You've done your job. Even if it's going to be stored on your property, it's going to be surrounded by mechitza so that you don't run into it. Then whatever is left, if you burn it early while it's still permitted, it's this kind of wasting property when it's not necessary to waste it. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is, whether it's okay to burn it early. I'd have to look it up, but it's just not coming off the tip of my tongue. I don't know it, without asking. Nina's reminding me here that the 7 Noahide laws acknowledge that there is one God. Not just acknowledge. I like know God, K-N-O-W, right? So it's not just admit that there's one God, but know about God, study God. That's why to fulfill the first Noahide commandment requires study and learning. What we're doing right here is fulfilling the first Noahide commandment. Don't blaspheme, don't murder. So know God, don't blaspheme, don't murder, don't eat a limb off a living animal, don't steal, no sexual immorality. That's the one I couldn't remember before. And establish courts of law. Tom Beck, as far as I remember, doesn't the halacha always or almost always follow Beis Hillel? Yes, almost always. There's a small number of matters where we follow Beis Shammai, but in general, absolutely, we follow Beis Hillel. Lynn over there in Texas, the stranger within the gates, if poor, is to be supported. If the ger is rich, the option to ask for payment for the nevela seems most fair. No, that's where the corn would have been good. So I'm not sure if we follow Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yehuda on this. Do we have that choice with respect to nevela to give or sell to either the Noahide among us or to the non-Jew, the Nochri? Or is it that we have to give to the ger and we can only sell to the Nochri? I'm not sure, but your point is really good. So you have to give this away? I mean, what if your next door neighbor who's a Noahide is very wealthy? Can you only give it as a gift? Well, maybe that is the law. Let me just check quickly if I can find this really fast. I was in the Art Scroll today, but what's nice about the corn is when there's open questions like this, they tell you right away, or almost always, they tell you what the halacha is. What does one do with an animal carcass? One may give an animal carcass to a resident alien as a gift. However, one may only sell it to a Gentile. He may not give it to him as a gift. So it sounds like you have the choice. You could give or sell to the Noahide among you, but to the Gentile, you may sell it. You don't give it. That apparently is how the law worked out there. And Caroline says, can a Noahide participate in Hanukkah? That's a good question. I mean, it's interesting because what we recite when we light the Hanukkah candles is, that you perform miracles for us, to our fathers at this time when you, saved us from assimilating into non-Jewish culture. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. It's a good question. Can Noahides observe Hanukkah? I'm not sure what the answer is. But I will mention that this is a time of year. If you're a Jew and you're sort of becoming more interested in Judaism, and that's fantastic, right? It is fantastic, and especially this time of year is the time to remember. Hanukkah is not something we do the rest of the culture is having its year-end holiday. And before there was Christmas, and all of our Christian friends should have a Merry Christmas, and you should absolutely, enjoy your holiday season. But even before there was Christmas, for thousands of years, there was a year-end holiday, and the Talmud talks about it. There were two of them. They were called Calenda and Saturnalia. And they were Roman holidays. And before they were Roman holidays, they were Greek holidays. And before they were Greek holidays, they had other names. And that holiday has always been around, and it's basically celebrating that the days were getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And Adam and Eve, when they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, they believed that, well, they weren't going to get killed right away, but God said, once you eat of that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, on that day you shall die. And so it was like maybe God liked them and spared them, but they still were subject to the death penalty. And so they thought, oh, because that happened around Rosh Hashanah time. And then what they noticed that the days were getting shorter and shorter and shorter through the fall. And then, and then at a certain point, the days stopped getting shorter, right? December 21st. And they kind of held the same length. And then they started getting longer again. And it was sort of like a rebirth of the world. And they realized that they weren't going to be killed by just the extinguishing of light in the world. And so it says Adam instituted an 8-day festival the next year. I don't know if it was 8 days, but established those days as a festival. And so since the beginning of humanity, there were holidays associated with that period. But those holidays, once the Jews became the Jewish people, they weren't for us. Those holidays aren't for the Jews. And what Hanukkah is all about is that there was a time when huge numbers of Jews were just leaving Judaism behind, leaving their obligations, leaving the practice, leaving the traditions of their ancestors, and not circumcising themselves, not learning Torah, not doing anything, just so that they could fit in among the very civilized Greeks. And it was almost like that was going to be a terminal issue where so many Jews were going to go out of Judaism that the Jewish people were going to die. And the miracle of Hanukkah, yes, absolutely beautiful that after that war was over, and there was enough oil to light the menorah in the temple only for one day, and that oil burned for 8 days until they could get more tahor oil, right? More oil in a state of purity, that they could start keeping the menorah lit. So there was an 8-day miracle that the oil lasted for 8 days. But the real miracle was that this ragtag group, the sort of last remnant of the Jews that were clinging to Torah and to Judaism, somehow prevailed in a civil war against all the Jews that were against them and siding with that kind of dominant, super dominant Greek civilized culture. And somehow they prevailed, and it's like Judaism and the Jewish people were saved. So at Hanukkah, it's really a time, if you're a Jew, to reconnect with Torah and with Judaism, and to take on something in your life, a mitzvah that you're not already doing. If you're learning with us, thank God, you're involved in Torah study. That's spectacular. Are you lighting Shabbos candles in your home? If you're a man, are you wrapping tefillin? Could you do a little more than you're doing now? Could you commit, for example, to getting off screens on Shabbos, right? If you're not doing that already, man, that one is not only a beautiful way to add to your Shabbos observance, but it'll just give peace to your soul, right? Today in the Wall Street Journal, there was a word for 2020, doom scrolling. Doom scrolling, right? There's so much bad news in the world that people are just doom scrolling on their phones. Well, Shabbos, there's no doom scrolling. You might read the paper, but if you just turn off the smartphone, the iPad, the computer, just 25 hours, you don't need it. And your life will be so much more peaceful and beautiful, and you'll know that you're fulfilling an obligation of observing Shabbos. And Hanukkah is a beautiful time to do that. The Berditchever Rebbe teaches that anything you begin during Hanukkah, any project you begin, including taking on an observance, a mitzvah, and also business ventures, but any project that you start during Hanukkah is blessed.